Listen, we all know last week's show was kind of a snooze fest, right? A friend described it like being in a business meeting, all right? So for this episode, I'm going to wear this futuristic helmet. Welcome to Peter Klein Presents, Fix the Media. You know it, I know it, the media is corrupt. And on this show we seek to clarify our vision of the world by analyzing and critiquing the news to determine what's real and what's fake. And along that path, we hope to find out how to fix the corrupt media. I am Peter Klein, and this is episode number 2. Oh lordy, is this show going to be better and blow the doors off that last one. We've got 4 killer topics. Well, 2 that you know are killer, and 2 that you're going to find out are killer. And don't worry, I'm lining up some great guests for the coming weeks. I've got Rebecca Romaine Stamos, The Weeknd, Gregory Peck. No, that's not true. But a couple of the guests coming up are going to be pretty surprising. But today's topics are, first, the media's coverage of the second impeachment of private citizen Donald Trump. So that's our current media story. Next is air travel in the Beforetime, where I'll share a funny story about a day trip I once took to Dallas, which is an excellent contrast with all the travel restrictions on shoe bomber vaccine world airlines. And next, can you guess? Probably not. The killing of Osama bin Laden. That's right. That's our historical media event, because even though really it's historical only because it happened in the past and how long ago. Well, that's kind of why we're going to talk about it, or part of it. And I discovered some interesting things about that event, if you want to call it that. Anyway, is meme review. What the hell is that? Not many people know this, but I can whittle up a pretty respectable meme on occasion. So I'm going to walk you through some choice cuts there, which I think you'll enjoy. And before I go any farther, I want to add that without warning or any expectation on my part, I was banned permanently from Facebook. About a year ago, I finally had enough, right, of Facebook, and I deleted my whole Facebook account very carefully. Only after I decided that I wanted to, I was going to be having this new show and I needed a Facebook presence, did I sign up with a new account. I had just spent a few solid hours setting up a new group for Peter Klein Presents. I had just deposited $100 for ads to promote my single post of episode 1, which hopefully you saw last week. Anyway, suddenly a message pops up saying my account is suspended for breach of policies. So to challenge this action, send us a photo of yourself. Take a selfie. So and it had some parameters, some instructions as to what they wanted in their selfie, right? So I went ahead and got it into position. No, I took the selfie and sent it to them. Then when I returned the next day and went to Facebook, the message now read that my account had been reviewed and that now I was permanently banned. And not only that, it specified that the decision was not reversible. So I have no idea what happened, but I will ask that if any of you out there have an insider friend at Facebook or some unique insight that you think could help, please let me know. Send an email to pkphost@protonmail.com or leave a message on the show call-in line. But I think that's enough bad news for now. Episode 2 needs to get off and running. But before we continue, we need to take care of business, essential business. After all, we know where we are. And we know what this is. So let's declare it proudly by standing and reciting the pledge. Okay? Let me see if I get this. I got to know which way to turn. Oh, there's the flag. Okay. Man, I'm telling you, this internet stuff. It's wacky. All right, you ready? Stand up, though. You standing? Put your hand on your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the vassal states of Clown World and to the clever grift on which it presently teeters, one group of suckers playing God with smartphones and TikTok for almost everybody. Thank you. Woo, I got a little pee-pee tingle from that. Everyone can now be seated.
This episode is sponsored by Cryoland. Professional clowns need professional tools. Cryoland clown makeup is tops in the industry. Don't waste your time with Ben Nye Clown White, or worse still, Mayron,
which may contain titanium dioxide.
You're a clown, you're a professional, you use Cryoland.
Okay, our first topic, assessing the media's reporting on the impeachment of Trump. It may seem counterintuitive to some to learn that I don't really pay much attention to the mainstream news. In fact, I've personally boycotted most media outlets. So how in the heck am I supposed to judge the media's reporting on the Trump impeachment, or anything else they report for that matter? Well, my goal is to stay current to within about a week on major news stories. I usually like focusing on the old stuff anyway. And honestly, I've found that I can stay current just by osmosis, as I go through life being bombarded by media at all times. And boycott isn't really the correct term. What I mean is I don't browse mainstream news sources to learn, what they think I need to know. And at most, I guess I might scan the headlines, really. So, that's not a total boycott. If I have an interest in the topic or need some specific data of some kind, I'll conduct a search, right? Sometimes I'll avoid results from mainstream sources entirely, but in this case, I wanted to know what the mainstream sources were reporting exclusively. Now, obviously, the mainstream media outlets were focused heavily last week on the second impeachment of Donald Trump. Without going into great deal at this point, I'm fairly convinced that an impeachment of a now former president alleging the instigation of an attempted insurrection that I think is a pretty gross mischaracterization of events was a bad idea. It might even be vindictive, vengeful, malevolent. I'm not sure what the precedent is here, or even whether impeachment applies to a former executive. My hunch is that it probably doesn't, but the articles could be twisted to allow for impeachment of a former executive in an effort to prevent them from holding public office in the future. For God's sake, I just saw that a measure was introduced to prevent Trump from ever being buried at Arlington. Okay? Talk about vindictive and hate-filled, and that's absolutely ridiculous. They're talking about things that aren't going to happen for 10 or 20 years anyway. And I'm not trying to predict that Trump's going to die at a certain age, but he's getting up there. But my concern isn't even about the legitimacy of the impeachment. It's the charges, the allegations, incitement of insurrection. In the actual article of impeachment, it claims Trump, quote, repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud. To use the word false is to imply that the authors are gods, masters of time, space, and dimension. So what if the election did involve widespread fraud, as many intelligent and competent Americans are inclined to suspect, right? But many saw this coming from miles away. I mean, it's the predictable next step in the total clowning of America. So whether you're a fan of Trump, hate the man, or just don't care, punishing him in this manner and going through this exercise at this time in America was a devious attack on millions of Americans, not so much Trump himself. And where did the media stand on this issue? Did they bother reporting the serious concerns I and others have? Did they objectively report the events playing out? Did they side with the global hall monitors? Or did they just pretend to be objective, which is their standard posture? So what I did is I reviewed the top 30 media outlets searching for one thing, any criticism of or examination of the impeachment. And what I mean by that is, did they interview anybody or report on someone's views that this was a completely unheard of, unprecedented, uncalled for? Was there any reporting on the event being something other than horrifyingly shocking, right? So I went to a particular site where I know I could find a good source of mainstream media outlets. I did it partly with the help of this website called All Sides, and I recommend everybody go there, allsides.com. Now, among other things, they rank media outlets based on their bias, left, center, or right. I selected 30 outlets from their chart of media bias ratings, right? So I knew they would, these groups or these outlets would be big enough, and that the group I selected was a fair sampling of the political spectrum, okay? So here we are at allsides.com, and I do recommend that you go check it out because it's a very cool organization, at least from what I can see, and I've kind of only recently learned about them. But here we are at their main page. If you click media bias in their main menu, that takes you to this page. Now scroll down the page and you'll find their live media bias ratings for the most read media sources, I believe, is what they've done to compile this list. Now, let's click on ABC News, for example. They rank ABC as leaning left, not fully left, but leaning left. And you'll note that you have the option of agreeing or disagreeing with them, and that constitutes part of their community feedback rating statistic. Here you'll see they have a total of 48,000 ratings just for this one source. So to my thinking, that's a pretty decent sampling. It also indicates that ABC was rated using a blind survey as recently as 2017. And if you want to see the details of that survey, you can click and go further into it to learn their methodology and other details. Now, so you can see how, done correctly, this type of service can be very valuable. What I would like to see is a similar rating service to gauge a source's accuracy, right? You could imagine this survey here, the question reading real, agree or disagree. You could imagine that reading real or fake. But I understand why All Sides hasn't committed to such an endeavor, because I can only imagine how difficult it would be if they were to do so, given the ability the media has to destroy an organization. At this point, they walk a fine line between left and right and haven't incurred the wrath of any particular outlet that I'm aware of. And All Sides provides many other services that I'm sure they wish to protect as well. So what I did last week was compile a list of the top 30 news sources from this list. Then I visited each site and did a search for the single word impeachment, making sure I sorted the list chronologically. I analyzed the 10 most recent articles, and again, I was looking for any headline that questioned the validity, the authenticity, or true intent of this second impeachment of Trump. And here are the results. 4 of the 30 sources had what I was looking for. Not a good sign. You'll note that some of these sources read almost. I was feeling generous, so I gave credit when a source at least named a person who was opposed to the impeachment. But let's see what these 4 sources have in common. First, let's look at the National Review. National Review. Oh, they're right-wing. I'm shocked. Okay, then we move on to the which is the American Spectator. Oh, right. Wow, I detect a trend here. What about the next, which is the Daily Caller? The Daily Caller. Oh, right-wing. Surprise. And finally, we have the Epoch Times. The Epoch Times. Oh, okay, so they're not fully right. They're just trending right. Okay? So, what does this tell me? It tells me that the right-wing biased news sources are more interested in reporting the truth, at least in this exercise and on this particular issue. Am I right-wing? I don't like to think of myself as either left or right. Do you imagine you were right-wing back during the George W. Bush administration? Probably not, but it is what it is. So we need to support these so-called right-wing outlets if we hope for more truthful reporting in the future. Whether you're tuning in through BitChute, Twitch, Brighteon, or by the grace of God, YouTube, whatever platform, click subscribe right now. sub this channel.
You can always unsubscribe later.
Then head over to peterklein.live for more info and links to shows on your favorite platform. Now we move on to air travel in the Beforetime. How old are you? Like 30, 32? What do you look like? Just kidding. But your age is relevant because if you're under 40 or maybe 50, you're going to be oblivious to this. You see, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, a little frustrating secret. I deliver the goods. You're definitely getting your money's worth on this episode. Back in the day, you used to be able to drive your car to the airport, park your car, walk with your bags right through a metal detector without even taking off your belt or even having to wait in lines most of the time. And then you would walk to the gate, straight out on the tarmac, and onto your plane. But did I say anything about a ticket? Hell no, I didn't. Let's say you were going from San Jose to Vegas, just for example. And since I'm from the Bay Area, that's something I'm familiar with. Just look for the plane that says Vegas and grab a seat. The stewardess will be along shortly to collect your fare. Oh, and it would be like $55 or something. And if I remember correctly, you could still do this around the time that the Sony Walkman came out. So I don't know exactly when that was, but that would give you an idea. Sometime in the late 70s. So that ought to paint the picture, or maybe 80. That ought to paint the picture I'm trying to paint here for you, or to show that air travel isn't what it used to be. And I have said this before, and people have rolled their eyes, but on night flights, stewardesses used to tuck you in, and if you needed a back scratch or a kiss on the forehead, then you had only to ask. Don't believe me? I submit to you the following clip as proof. You see that? Yeah. And there it is. I mean, I told you, right? Why do you challenge me like this? So fast forward to the mid-90s, okay? I was working in the 90s, the last half of the 90s, I was working for what they call a Tier 1 internet company. And what that means is the company was called Epic, or EPOCH, Epic Internet. And they were one of 12 or 14 at that time, what I would call first-tier internet providers. And the reason they are called that is that they are not buying access to the internet. Their network makes up a portion of the internet itself. So these 12 to 14 companies had peering arrangements, and at various facilities, which they would call metropolitan area exchanges, they would, like there'd be one in Chicago, one down in LA, one up in the Bay Area, one over, this is how it was done, at least in the US. And they would interconnect their networks. Now, we were a business-to-business company, so I had to travel for business occasionally, fairly frequently actually, at one point. And my first assignment was to open up a sales office in Lexington, Kentucky, which is right in the center of the state. And for reference, about an hour to the west of Lexington is Louisville, Kentucky. And about an hour and 15 or hour and a half north of Lexington is Cincinnati, Ohio, which is right at the border there. So that gives you an idea where it's at. So when I was in Lexington, it was winter, it was December, and I had a cold. And it wasn't just a cold, it turned into a flu, I think. I was sick as a dog. And I had a flight scheduled not a flight, but a trip scheduled. It was a day trip to Dallas, okay? And the whole intent was to meet with it was kind of like an annual thing, but it wasn't really, it was really the first time I think that I had met with them directly at a remote location like that as kind of a get-together, how are things going, that type of thing. At least that's the way it was explained to me. So the girl a real nice girl, Amy, who would arrange my travel, she called and told me what I had to do, and it was an early flight. So I took the early flight from Lexington to Louisville that morning. And let me tell you what happened. I get on the plane. I'm sick as a dog. We get up to elevation, and this is literally it's only an hour drive. So it's almost, I could have just grabbed a cab, but this is the way it was set up. So I went ahead and followed the rules. And I took the I took the flight to Louisville. Now, when I got there, as we were descending, I realized I was sick. My whole head was all stuffed up. My ears didn't pop. Okay? I was chewing gum, going, I can't. And as I descended, I realized, okay, this is probably a problem. So I didn't worry too much about it. I was already sick. I figured, look, I'm on time. Let me just get to the next flight, because I needed to make that transfer, get on the flight from Louisville now down to Dallas. So I did. I made it on time, get on the plane, felt like a dog. It was definitely bad weather, so it was inclement, and it was a choppy flight. It was definitely making me nauseous. I felt like crap. So anyway, we go to descend into Dallas, and then this is interesting. Again, my ears don't pop. And so as we descended into Dallas, I realized I'm deaf. I can't hear anything. All I can hear is that kind of like the sound that you would hear through your skull, very bassy. I really was not able to hear crap. And I looked like crap, and I felt like crap. So the meeting was scheduled at the airport. Now, what they had done is they had just booked a room, or they knew there would be availability at I think it was the American Airlines Admirals Club or something, right? So I get there. Now my boss, you should understand, my boss, or at least the boss, this guy's like the VP of sales of the company. His name was Dave Carroll. Really very, very sweet, very nice gentleman. Very professional, and also kind of charming, and a bit kind of pretty slick, I guess, in a way. I think the analog for people that you would be familiar with would be, he was kind of like a Hugh Hefner kind of person, okay? Now this other guy who was also with him, who I knew was going to be there, he, and I won't mention his name, he was, just to try to describe what he was like, again, an analog, I would say, you have Hugh Hefner, that's, my boss on one side, Dave, and then on the other side of that coin, you have this other guy who was like Joe Pesci, okay? So the thing is that, and I wasn't kidding about Joe Pesci, I'm not kidding, he's like playing a character in a movie. And so, as an example, the first time I met this guy, earlier than this, we were I think we were in a hotel, and we just like popped into a hotel bar, because we were maybe all checking in at the same time or something. And I saw Dave, hey, how you doing? And he introduced me to this guy. And then we go into the hotel bar, and I had, I think, like one rum sour or something. But that's all it took, because and I was listening to him converse with Dave, and I was like, it sounded like it was a scene from Godfather or something. And now understand, these two guys were both GT executives. If you think General GE executives. And so if you think that GE isn't a bunch of gangsters, I would say that I could prove you wrong here. So this guy, oddly enough, I spouted off, and I said, look, what are you doing here? It's like you're turning Epic into some kind of like mafia. Something to that effect. And as I was saying it, Dave was looking at me behind this guy going, no. And I knew I'd screwed up. And so the guy, what's he do? He comes to me, and he's like, he grabs me, he like wrestles with me a little bit, and then he's like giving me noogies and stuff, and I'm like, hey, man. And he's like, hey, I love this guy. And he goes, he says something like, Peter, he goes, hey, listen, do you know what mafiosa means, And I go, I can't think, no. And he goes, it means family, your family, right? So it was real bad. So at any rate, now we are in Dallas at the, whatever the hell this place is called, and having this little office to ourselves. And I walk in, and I tell them I'm basically deaf, and they could tell I was sick as a dog. And then of course the guy starts start talking to me without saying anything, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. And then of course, to make matters worse, he says, or Dave goes, okay, so at some point in the meeting, we discuss other things, and he goes, so can we see your forecast now? And I said, forecast? I don't have one on me, and he goes, what, you didn't prepare a forecast? That's what we're doing here today. We're meeting to get your forecast. And I thought, oh God. So it was a horrible, horrible experience from that aspect. Now, the meeting concludes, and it's time for me to go home. And I didn't get any better. My ears never popped. I felt like I could maybe die. I was getting close to that level. I hadn't eaten in a while, and of course I was extremely nauseous. But I hadn't spewed or anything. But I basically just like hobbled my way over to the gate and sat and waited for my next flight. Now this was a long meeting, hours and hours long. turns out we are now looking it's in the early evening, but I have to fly back to Louisville and then take the Louisville flight to Lexington. I make the flight to Louisville. To be honest, at that point, I don't recall whether my ears popped or anything, but I was sick as could be. And then when I got off of that plane and I got over to the gate in Louisville to get on, actually I got on the plane to go to Lexington from Louisville, which would have ended my flight, at least the flights. I had to make my way home from there. But I remember getting on the plane, and if you've ever been on these smaller airlines or these shorter routes with the smaller planes with the props, and you get these stewardesses, and if they're really, really friendly and extremely bubbly, and a lot of them sometimes even seem like, we're going to die, and let's just have a few drinks and celebrate the end of our lives, that kind of level of entertainment. And of course I was sick, so I was trying to be like, okay, but it was making me even sicker thinking, oh my God, it's going to be a bad flight. And the weather had picked up and become even worse, and it was bitter cold at that time. This was, I don't know, maybe 96, 97, the winter of December. So we took the flight, and of course, yes, it was choppy as could be. And I thanked God all the whole time. I was thinking, thank God this is a short flight. Thank God this is a short flight. We descended into Lexington, and I got off the plane, and I got into the concourse of the terminal. And I don't know whether you've been at the second-tier cities like Lexington. There's a point in time where flights end for the day. Maybe it's 10 p.m. or something. So maybe it's around 10 p.m. where I'm pulling in, and of course it's dark and cold. But in these concourses or these second-tier city airports, they oftentimes, once the flights are wrapped up, they start closing the place out. So I remember walking down the thing, and all of a sudden it's like, choo-choo, the lights are just going off. And I'm thinking, okay, now I'm maybe, one of only 2 or 3 people there. I couldn't see. Everyone else kind of hustled and got their bags and were gone. I couldn't see what was going on. I got to the entrance to the place, where, the automatic doors opened. And I was parked in the general parking because I knew I'd be back that day, not even overnight parking. So I made my way to outside, and as soon as I stepped outside, the wind hit me, and I just went, oh my God. So I went back and sat down for about 10 minutes and thought, I got to make it to my car. But I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. I couldn't make it. I didn't think. I was concerned. But I did. I made it to the car. I got in, turned it on, hit the heater. And I swore I sat there for 30 minutes probably before I thought I had the strength to be able to drive home. I drove home, parked, got inside, threw all my crap down, flopped into the bed with my clothes, and proceeded to sleep for maybe 24 hours. But the reason is I think it was, it was Friday, so I had the weekend, of course, off. So the reason I explain this to you is that I just wanted to cover the fact that flying was different back then. Now I don't fly at all. I think I avoid it like the plague. And of course, the experience of it is pretty crappy. And of course, it's nothing like what we just saw. There's no stewardess giving me a handy J and tucking me in and giving me a kiss. Sweet dreams, honey. There's none of that. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So just remember that we live in clown world, and in clown world, unless you're going to spend between $8,000 and $16,000 for your flight, you're not going to get your own bed, and you're not going to be treated with respect or any hand jobs.
Over the years, I've received emails and comments from people saying things like, "Your videos have changed my life," or "I've become accustomed to your voice," and other corny sentiments. Those messages did get to me.
What a freaking nut job!
My plan is to focus on independent news production full-time, supplemented by my freelance work and, you guessed it, supporter contributions. So, if you've ever made a contribution to James Corbett, Tim Pool, or whomever, please consider doing the same for me. A one-time contribution by PayPal or a monthly contribution by Patreon. For $5 or $10, patrons will get access to a weekly live stream I'm working on, which I'm calling Apocalypse Workshop. Learn how to not only survive, but thrive in Clown World. So head over to either paypal.me/TNN or patreon.com/Peter Klein and give, if you're able. And if you don't support my work, how could you live with yourself? By the way, patrons will get immediate access to all my videos from both TNN and IMS. I think it's well over 150 programs and documentaries.
Now we move on to the killing of Osama bin Laden. And that's our next historical topic. Now, right away, before we get into this, you should know that from this point forward, I'm going to refer to him as Usama and not Osama. After all, his name is spelled Usama with a U and not an O. For some reason, that incorrect spelling became almost ubiquitous in the U.S. media, not so much in the international media. So, when did Osama bin Laden get killed? Even if you can't recall exactly the when, you probably remember the how. And still, some of you may not know anything about it at all. So let's take a look at the news from back in May of 2011.
President Obama announced the killing of Osama bin Laden in a dramatic White House speech last night.
A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. No Americans were harmed. They took care to avoid civilian casualties. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
From Times Square to Ground Zero to the White House, the familiar chant of USA, USA resonated as citizens learned that Osama bin Laden was dead. The announcement sparked immediate jubilation. In Times Square, people gathered around giant news tickers to see the latest updates and take in the moment they heard the world's most wanted terrorist was dead.
It's just amazing. We were walking out of a pizza joint and all of a sudden it was like we saw on the bar and the TV and everyone just glued.
The need for proof, the need for DNA. Point out for a moment, if you will, the DNA testing that's been going on for the better part of a decade.
Oh, this is going to have to be very, very clear in the Arab world. They're going to have to show his face. They're going to have to show his body. They're going to not just take it on DNA testing. The United States can't show a vial of blood and say this is Osama bin Laden.
My favorite bartender turned off the baseball game and put this on. And I knew this was a historic moment, and I had to be here with my fellow Americans.
So there it is. From the sequence of clips taken from across the U.S. media spectrum, you get the gist of it. Osama bin Laden was killed on the orders of Obama in Pakistan in the town of Abbottabad, which I think is actually called Abbottabad or Abbottabad? It's a very odd pronunciation. I'm sure I'm mangling it, but anyway, I'll call it Abbottabad. It's how it's spelled. He was killed in the early morning hours of May 2nd, 2011. The attack was carried out by Navy SEALs, who were transported by helicopter. Also worth noting is the reporting of the attack involving a major firefight in which there was actual video of fire burning at the supposed compound. This was supposedly taken by someone there in Pakistan with a cell phone. Now, the rest of the story began to unfold over the next few days, back in May of 2011. There was a famous photo issued soon after that depicted Biden, Obama, Clinton, and others in the Situation Room, and all appeared to be looking at something out of frame. We were told they were watching a live feed of the raid, filmed with helmet cams worn by the Navy SEALs. But later that story changed somewhat when it was reported they lost the feed before any of the action took place. Now, Hillary Clinton herself later told reporters the likely reason why she had her hand over her face was to cover up a cough from one of her usual springtime colds. It was also reported by ABC News, who credited anonymous sources, that evidence seized during the raid was sent back to the FBI in Quantico, and that evidence included hard drives, DVDs, CDs, and other items. Later, it was reported that there were guns found in bin Laden's purported bedroom, 2 of them, a rifle and a pistol. The raid itself was said to have been carried out by a total of 79 personnel, including commandos and a dog. 1 dog, 79 humans, 1 dog. The main contingent of commandos departed from Jalalabad, Afghanistan, in 2 Black Hawk stealth helicopters on a route that took about 90 minutes. So we're supposed to believe that these helicopters flew deep into Pakistan, into a populated city, to a location that was only less than a mile from a military academy without detection. Okay? So that would maybe be the first red flag. Well, not the first, but a red flag. Now, once they were over the target, one of the Black Hawks is reported to have struck the compound's perimeter wall with its tail rotor, causing it to, quote, soft crash. Yet none of its passengers were injured. Should we call that yeah, let's go ahead and put that down as another red flag. Now, from here, the reports and official statements differ dramatically. But there's some agreement that either a short or extended firefight took place with persons in the guest house there, once in the compound. Because since they crashed, they had to climb over. The other helicopter had to land outside the perimeter of the compound, which was not planned, and they had to actually scale the wall. Right, so now they're in the compound. They have a firefight with some people that are in the guest house, and then also on the first and second floors of the main house as the SEALs made their way to the third floor, where bin Laden was supposed to be, which I think they said was an 80% chance that bin Laden would be there, or that it was an 80% chance that they had that the man they were thinking was Osama was in fact him. So anyway. 2 or more people are shot, including one of bin Laden's wives during that initial phase. Now, this guy, Robert O'Neill, who's a Navy SEAL, supposedly, he later publicly gave his account and bragged of being the one who shot bin Laden. And he claimed to have, what he did was he pushed past the lead SEAL on the way up to the third floor and into bin Laden's bedroom. And there he saw bin Laden, who was behind one of his wives, holding her by the shoulders, right? And then he pushed her forward towards O'Neill, at which time O'Neill fired 2 rounds into bin Laden's forehead and another round into his body once he was crumpled up, collapsed on the floor. It should be noted that O'Neill didn't indicate that he shot bin Laden in his after-action report, which I think is significant. And also, he has been confronted or at least challenged in the media, both TV news and also in articles by other Navy SEALs. It's a real clusterfuck, you know. Photographs of the scene and of the bodies were then taken, including of bin Laden. All told, by that point, 3 men and 1 woman were killed in addition to bin Laden, and their bodies were dragged out into the courtyard along with the other family members and children whose arms had been zip-tied behind their backs. Now, aside from bin Laden, all were left for Pakistani authorities. Now, because one of the Black Hawks was damaged in the crash, it was blown up by Navy SEALs to prevent obtaining its classified technology. 2 Chinook helicopters had been deployed nearby, right? They had kind of followed them in, and the reason was for backup transportation or for whatever contingency. One of them was called into the scene to assist evacuation since they were, 1 helicopter down. Now, all of this was done within 38 minutes, they claim, which is a long time. That's not like an in and out operation, as anybody knowing these things would likely understand. And all of it was done without being heard by nearby residents, except for one. There was one person who said he heard rapid gunfire in a firefight type of, sounded to him like a firefight, followed by an explosion, which it seems kind of in line with what the story is said to be. Now, the team then flew to Bagram Airfield, and the body of bin Laden was then flown onward to the aircraft carrier Carl Vinson, claiming that no country could or would take the remains of bin Laden within the 24 hours required by Islamic tradition. We were forced to bury bin Laden at sea. His body was washed, his hair was shampooed, he was shaved clean, and then wrapped in a white sheet and placed inside a plastic body bag, weighted down, by the way, with 300 pounds of chain, as I understand it, which is a little unusual. So this was then placed on a white board, and prepared religious remarks were read. The board was then tilted, and the body slid off into the sea. In actuality, what I've read is that the board, because he had 300 pounds of iron chain in this body bag, the board, he didn't really slide off, so they wound up losing the board, and so the board and the body bag went into the sea, the bag sank, and the board just floated off. So I won't go into the DNA issue too deeply, since trying to make heads or tails of that is virtually impossible. But the general consensus is that officials claimed to have positively identified bin Laden's body before they dumped him in the ocean, which I think would be appropriate. Because if it wasn't him, they went through all that trouble. They should probably document at least that. Document that you didn't get bin Laden, right? Now, from my research, it seems that the average time for DNA genealogy testing, right? And they had bin Laden's sister's DNA, so that was what they were going to compare it with. is at minimum 3 days, and it's usually more like 2 weeks, depending upon how the process goes, because it's not always the same. And I think the claim that no country could or would accept bin Laden's remains is quite ridiculous. First, one of his wives is claimed to have said bin Laden wanted to die in Afghanistan, and his body was in the country twice within that 24-hour window as they were flying in and out, right? But second, and I think this one is more fundamentally true, since when does the U.S. care about the wishes of Middle Eastern countries like Afghanistan or Pakistan, right? I mean, that's absolutely nuts. They wouldn't, no country would allow us to. Well, which country allows you to go in and set up bases and go to war? You know what I'm saying? ISIS is going to get you. One crazy aspect of the 2011 killing of bin Laden is the bizarre way in which it was first reported and became headline news. This is going to be the next super red flag, okay? The timeline just doesn't check out, and the public's response is even more bizarre, and that's where my findings come into play. I don't know of anyone that has pointed this out before, and certainly no one I don't think, certainly no one I know of has done any analysis like I have. So the raid takes place in the early morning hours on Sunday, which would be the early evening in Washington, D.C. But as early as 7 p.m., a Navy officer, I've forgotten his name, is the first to report the news by tweet. Okay? And 47 seconds after that tweet is another tweet from, can you guess who? I mean, it should be obvious. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. Clearly, The Rock is going to be the next person to provide us some classified information, right, in advance. Anyway, I have no idea how that happened, and it appears to have been independent, right? You know, right? There's no connection between these two individuals, and the timing is supposed to have just been coincidence. So how did The Rock obtain that intelligence? CNN later runs an article about how the news was leaked. Now, that article was written by, and please forgive me for having to show you his picture, Brian Stelter. Okay? So just please, it's over, it's done, you had to see, that's who it was, we'll move on. Now, the day before the raid, Dianne Feinstein gets a call from Leon Panetta, who was heading the CIA at that time, telling her of the pending raid, right? So she's told in advance. Now, she's the head of the armed services, whatever, so that makes sense. Then, late the next afternoon, this is the next day, he calls and tells her about the raid and its conclusion. And bin Laden, we got him. I can only imagine, right? We got him, baby. And she got this message on her way to a memorial in Los Angeles for a longtime political advisor. After her memorial speech, she blabs about the raid to the people in attendance. She just can't keep it to herself. Now, can you guess who the memorial was for? Cam Kuwata, the guy who was deeply troubled by the bizarre events he witnessed at the Democratic Convention, where Obama appeared deathly ill, and then it was followed by strange chanting that came from his dressing room, from which he emerged an energized dynamo that couldn't even recognize Kuwata. Yep, that guy. So a couple weeks later, he was found dead, by the way, sitting in a chair in his office. He'd been sitting there for a while and starting to stink. I would say the whole thing stinks. But anyway, while the Obama administration was mulling about whether to show the public a photo of the deceased bin Laden, two notable fake images turned up on the internet, and you've probably seen one or both of those. I think just about everyone has. I thought they were unsourced and that was known to all the official parties, especially after they were clearly exposed as fakes almost immediately. But it turns out that 3 senators and other officials were basing their confirmation in terms of their duty as administrators in the government. They were basing it on those fake images, okay? For example, Senator Saxby Chambliss, who was the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, swore that he saw infallible evidence of bin Laden's death. The photo he swore was authentic. He later said, quote, "I was shown a picture. It looked like a picture of bin Laden. It appeared to be accurate, but it was not." He was the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and number 2 to Dianne Feinstein on that committee. And just imagine. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense that we're dealing with here. So those photos claimed to have been taken of bin Laden never have been released to the public. Neither have the DNA results or any other proof, which the media themselves have often admitted as being controversial. And also, I learned more recently that there has been significant evidence. There's been the seaman on the Carl Vinson, and an aircraft carrier is almost certain to have far more traffic of individuals on topside, right, on the deck and on the flight deck. So the fact that this whole burial at sea and stuff happened, and yet they're sending tweets and text messages and letters and calls home talking about, honey, what is this about? I don't know what you're talking about, because we never saw anything of the sort. So that's also a red flag. Now I want to stop right here with all this ridiculous reports of the 2011 killing and explain what is more likely to have happened, okay? In a nutshell, bin Laden died in Afghanistan in December of 2001, and that's roughly 10 years earlier, people. There are numerous reports of his death, and even a fairly detailed report of the funeral in U.S. news sources in early 2000, including who was in attendance and their statements as well. Not to mention all the speculation of his grave health issues before and after 9/11. Okay, so I think in July there were reports that bin Laden he was visited by visited by CIA staff or Department of State staff, one of the two, I can't recall, but it was definitely reported that he was hospitalized, and these two individuals who were American met with him while he was hospitalized, okay? According to a report in The Guardian from November of 2001, quote, bin Laden has often been reported to be in poor health. Some accounts claim that he is suffering from hepatitis C and can expect to live for only 2 more years. According to Le Figaro, last year he ordered a mobile dialysis machine to be delivered to his base in Kandahar in Afghanistan. His base. Kind of interesting wording. Fun fact, the same guy who invented the Segway scooter, right, also invented the portable dialysis machine, Dean Kamen. He died. So whether bin Laden died in 2001 or 2011, or even were he still alive somewhere, as claimed by Edward Snowden, by the way, it's important to ask ourselves, did he have anything to do with the 9/11 attacks? Just a few weeks after the attacks, bin Laden sends a video statement in which he denies involvement. But even earlier, on September 26th, I believe, he is interviewed by Karachi Ummat, which is an Afghani newspaper, in which he says the following. And mind you, this is a CIA translation, so understand this is what they want you to believe, or at least that's what they're willing to put out there. And so it may be an accurate translation, and I suspect it is. So he says, quote, I have already said that I am not involved in the 9/11 September 11 attacks in the U.S. As a Muslim, I try my best to avoid telling a lie. Neither I had any knowledge of these attacks, nor I consider the killing of innocent women, children, and other humans as appreciable acts. Islam strictly forbids causing harm to innocent women, children, and other people. Such a practice is forbidden even in the course of a battle. Whether it is President Bush or any other U.S. president, they cannot bring Israel to justice for its human rights abuses or to hold it accountable for such crimes. What is this? Is it not that there exists a government within the government in the United States? That secret government? It must be the one to ask who made the attacks, unquote. And a personal note I will add based on my research into this topic recently, a search of the incredible report Collateral Damage by E.P. Heidner, which is largely the story of the cause and effects of 9/11, will produce no mentions of bin Laden. I was blown away. He's not even mentioned once. And it's like a 79-page, it's more or less like a scientific research paper in terms of its level of detail. And it's all about the attacks and the aftermath, and some of why the attacks occurred. No mentions of bin Laden. So, curious. So I'm concerned, along with many others, that the entire story of bin Laden's murder by U.S. forces in 2011 is an elaborate fabrication. Of course, this ties right back to the potentially fabricated narrative of the 9/11 attacks, which gives rise to this 2011 story in the first place. Maybe you think it's possible, as I do, that high-level government officials and even middle manager types could tell lies of this magnitude, staging much of what we believe are majorly significant events or tragedies. That in itself is extremely concerning. But if you think they're capable of it, or even seen evidence of that, then it is what it is. and should be considered and dealt with, sure. But what concerns me at least as much, or maybe even more, is the possibility that great numbers of seemingly everyday citizens might also be willing to participate in these grand deceptions. And the response to the 2011 raid is possible evidence to support that premise, or to support that whole area. I'll begin with this article from Voice of America, which happens to be an admitted government propaganda news outlet. The article is dated May 1st at 8 p.m. Now, the subtext of the photo within the article refers to it portraying events occurring on May 2nd. Now, if we read into the article, it says, quote, U.S. President Barack Obama was preparing to announce Osama bin Laden was dead when word got out and crowds started gathering late Sunday outside the White House in Washington and at Ground Zero in in New York City. So to simplify the chronology, though, when the raid took place at roughly 1 a.m. Abbottabad, Pakistan time, it was 3 p.m. Washington time. Now, we've already discussed the news leaks that occurred in the late afternoon, which seems to correspond with that event timeline. And we're told that Obama was working on his speech in the later evening of that same day. The press report being later scheduled for 10:30. And Obama finally making his speech, by the way, after delays at 11:30. So between 11:30, closer to midnight. So essentially the events I've just described all took place on the same evening. The report we just covered by Voice of America makes it clear that the crowds started gathering even before Obama's announcement. Other reports described the crowds remaining until early Monday morning, as Obama's speech didn't conclude until near midnight. I can understand the enthusiasm and revelry we can see in that clip, especially given the times and the fairly young age of the people who were celebrating. We see essentially college students, I think, predominantly. Sunday night in Times Square is usually pretty busy, so it could easily turn into a celebration of large numbers, I imagine, especially considering they were announcing bin Laden's death on outdoor, those big outdoor news tickers, right, scrolling by. The two people picked at random in that clip, by the way, or those clips, both describe learning about the news on TV in a local bar, right? So they caught it on by the same means, the same method. In other words, they were propagandized just like the rest of us, but they had the information sooner than we did and happened to be right where they could gather with a group of individuals and turn it into a party. The celebration at Ground Zero is harder to explain. But let's look at just the celebration at the White House, okay?
Patriotism filled the air outside the White House into the early hours of Monday morning. 2 hours after the announcement, with celebrations still roaring, the U.S. Secret Service brought in barriers to push back revelers from the White House. Gatherers said the importance of this historical moment reaches beyond the gates of the White House.
See, this is a very important moment.
So we've established that news of the event only began to leak out earlier in that evening. Yet we just saw that what was reported was thousands of revelers at the White House as early as 9 p.m. How did so many people learn the news and assemble in such large numbers in less than 2 hours? The White House isn't Times Square, and it isn't immediately flanked by hotels and bars and stuff. So it seems a very deliberate action to travel there. And what would you expect to find when you got there, at least in the first half of that celebration? Considering the celebration was reported as spontaneous, too. That's another thing. I've noticed that these reports tend to always say the crowds gathered spontaneously. And that's a very deliberate term. I would suggest that indicates that they were getting this story handed to them by a media relations company of some kind, be it Ogilvy or any one of these three corporate, propagandizing mouthpieces of the deep state or of the New World Order, whatever you want to call it. The people who tell the people on the parrots what to squawk, right? So I would bet against the likelihood that what we just we're told, what I just described is true, and it actually happened as described. But something else was also bothering me about the footage, especially at the White House. There are a lot of American flags. Presumably, the flags were brought by these revelers, as, once again, the celebration was spontaneous. So let's count the flags in just this 10-second clip. It's getting up there. So 8. We got 8. Anyway, that was essentially a 6-second clip that was stretched out slightly to make it something more like 18 seconds. So we had time to see what we're looking at. But understand that I was very sure to only indicate for sure what I could see in this low resolution footage was a flag. Now that's a lot of flags. So what do you think? Somehow these kids were either handed these flags and encouraged to celebrate wildly, or they were asked to bring them to the event. But in either case, we're talking about foreknowledge. I think these people were offered a small sum of $100 or $200 to attend an event or a party at the White House. It probably wasn't advertised as a crisis actor role, but rather something more benign. However, I think they were solicited far earlier than 3 p.m. when bin Laden was said to have been killed, and possibly even the day before. If anyone out there has a theory that might better explain what we just saw here, please use the call-in line and tell me about it.
All right, here we are, meme review. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty good at memes, and although some of these aren't technically memes, but you get a sense of what I'm going for here. But some of them are absolutely memes, and memes I would deem as being of high quality. And I'm not going to spend much time on this. This is just a sampling. I've done a heck of a lot more because the show's running kind of long, so I'm just going to kind of cruise through these. The first I see here, do you remember a few years ago there was the Zika virus, and news was reporting all kinds of concerns they had about who might have the Zika, who might possess Zika. And, of course, then I noticed that if you just look up online where you can buy it, you can just go buy it online. And I note that here's a supply that's technically from the Rockefeller strain. And if you're a nonprofit, you can get it as little as $430 for some freeze-dried Zika. Here's a good one. Again, not a meme, but you get a sense of what I'm doing here. This is just an example of somebody who is issuing their opinion about independent media solidarity, the group I was a member of and co-founded. And, hey, their vote is just as important as anyone else's. So apparently they have a negative view of our work or our group. So I would say duly noted. 600,000 Americans die from cancer each year. 13,000, a very much smaller number, of Americans die from AIDS each year. This year, the National Institute of Health will spend the following: $5.6 billion in cancer research and $3.1 billion, or more than half of the money spent on cancer research, on AIDS research. And to that I say, welcome to Clown World, honk honk. Ameriwise, drive truth. I'm depicting here a drive-through where if you want to obtain one ultimate truth for $9.99, you have only to drive through. But as you can see, they look kind of bored because people aren't very interested. I'm trying to convey here the sense I have that a lot of people just don't really care about the truth. They don't understand the value of the truth. And so, why try to shove it down their throats and force feed them the truth when you might just be kind of fighting an uphill battle? Mark Barden. So, okay, there was an event in 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut. Let me tell you about this, something I found here. There was a punk band in the late 70s in Oxford, England called Vile Bodies. The original drummer was run over by a car and killed. That, I believe, did happen. He was replaced by a Mark Barden. This is the only detailed photo of him available. So here is the Mark Barden back in the late 70s in Oxford, England in the band Vile Bodies. And what I did is I did a little comparison of this gentleman, everything from his hairline to his eyes to the way his eyebrows sit, to the corners of his mouth, to the shape of his nose. And if I were to hazard a guess, I would argue that this gentleman are one and the same. Now, why is that interesting? Well, because this Mark Barden here, that was a parent that is purportedly a parent of a deceased child that was murdered in the event in Connecticut. This person here is Mark Barden and has no mention whatsoever on their biography page in which they discuss the fact that they're a musician, they cover their childhood. No mention whatsoever of spending any time in England, let alone being in the band Vile Bodies. And when the band Vile Bodies reunited in, I think, 2015 or 2016 in Manhattan, New York, in America, they posted on their Facebook who was in attendance, and the only member of the band that did not attend this reunion was, guess who? Mark Barden. So this is something I did a long time ago. This is playing on the theme that Osama bin Laden may have been a CIA contractor who went by the name Tim Osman when traveling about in the U.S. So I tried to create a composite image here that would reflect what he may have looked like. And I know that some people have used this in articles and have put it in videos and stuff. I saw one just the other day. I find that interesting. Okay, so James Howell was arrested Sunday morning in Santa Monica with guns and explosives, the same day as the Orlando shooting. Remember that? There was that gay nightclub down in Orlando, and it got shot up. A lot of people were killed. And at any rate, GetOffTheBS.com reports that Santa Monica PD officers told them Howell had actually called the police department claiming he, quote, needed protection from the CIA. He claimed to have been trained in shooting and bomb making by the CIA with Omar Mateen, the supposed shooter in the reporting we saw, and 3 others at a camp in Virginia. He said Omar had an accomplice named Brandy and got spooked when Omar was killed, right? Because he wound up losing his life down there at the nightclub scene. Howell couldn't find Dan, his contact in California, and said, they are going to kill me. They lied to us. So this guy was out in California on the day of the Orlando shooting. However, he says that he trained with Omar at a camp that was a CIA camp in Virginia. Now, this report was reported by Jim Stone, who's a curious character. I don't necessarily support the legitimacy of this Mr. Stone, although he does have a lot of great information at times. But it was also reported by G. Edward Griffin, who I do think is a solid source. So if you didn't know this, check it out. The Challenger astronaut's still alive. I just kind of basically did my best to try to summarize this story and explain the enormous problem we have here. But to just give you a sense of this, the main issue I see here is that if even one of the Challenger crew is still alive today, then we have an enormous problem. Now, Michael J. Smith is still alive, apparently, as he's the professor at the University of Wisconsin, or a professor at University of Wisconsin at Madison, and he has the same exact name. He appears to be the same gentleman. It's a little harder to see it in Judith Resnick, but again, the same name. She's now a professor, or was at one point professor at Yale Law School. And then we have this gentleman. When you look at some of the image comparisons, I just did one here, just for reference, but let me tell you, this guy is dead on. And he went by Francis Dick Scobie. He was the mission commander, and he is now Richard Dick Scobie, the CEO of Cows and Trees. Very interesting, and it's a difficult... I think people just don't even want to look at this problem, because it is a potential problem. If you want, I'll just leave this here for you to look at. Freeze frame this if you want to see what it is that I've written here. If you're familiar with Dave McGowan, he wrote a great book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. He winds up dying in 2015, but this gentleman set up a meeting at the William Morris Agency in L.A. Glenn Howerton is, I think, a great actor, and I really think he's very funny. And his show, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I think is a very cool show. Kind of a break from traditional media crap. But there's a little bit of an issue here, so I raised that in this meme. And of course, I couldn't resist Kellogg's COVID-19. I mean, it does look kind of tasty, you have to admit, right? Buy it, it's made just for you. And of course, comment ping pong and pizza, where I summarize it by saying, look, it's where at-risk youths meet for friendly table tennis matches with the world's elite.
What's so hard to understand about that? Okay, here we go. So you're familiar with the show Duck Dynasty. I actually tuned in to watch just a segment to see what it was about. And I watched maybe almost the whole episode. And I got to say, these guys are playing it off like these guys are hillbillies. This dude looks like a hillbilly. Big old bushy beard. He looks like, hey, right on, Leonard Skinner. And this dude here looks like he's barely competent, right? I wouldn't hope that this guy has a right to vote. This dude here looks like, hey, I'll kill you. Take my guns. Get off my land, right? And this dude here looks like he's probably, growing weed and consuming quite a bit of it. Hillbillies. Yeah, but see, here's the pictures that I found of them. They almost, you can imagine, these are scenes, if we had video clips here, we would see these guys with their rolled up khakis running down the beach. And here they are with their golf. And what is he, are they playing badminton? It's absolutely atrocious to see the real life people versus their characters they play. And this is supposed to be reality TV. Totally fake. I don't know what to make of this. I ran it through photo forensics. It is what it is. It's a picture depicting, at least from what I can see, I can't detect any image manipulation. Even in the case of this van, I did some searching for this RV, rather. And I found a number of RVs very similar to this, which have the FEMA logo emblazoned on it. And even this particular color scheme, I found this one, I believe, but I couldn't confirm it because of the angle of the picture. And I'll leave it to you to determine what in the hell is happening here. Okay? Very odd. I don't take credit for this. This was found here at freedomslips.com. And of course, COVID-19, total bullshit from General Media Corporation. This one I thought was pretty cool because, people who are buried in their phones and who live in that virtual world and spend so much time in that virtual world, I figured maybe if Jesus were around, he might ask you to give him your phone, at least temporarily put you in timeout. And, of course, as we all know, Hollywood loves children. And so I couldn't think of a better way to exemplify that than to show this scene from some kind of film or commercial or something. And you can imagine how the baby really enjoys when they're being tossed around by dudes in green suits with fully hooded heads. Yeah, so anyway, boycott the media. I guess ISIS broke up. You know what I miss most? The pageantry. Did you also notice that someone did an analysis of this shot or this video in which they determined that from what they could tell, statistically, these guys in ISIS would be over 7 feet tall, every one of them. And since we know that's not true, we're probably looking at some very heavily manipulated photos, stuff that probably goes beyond the capability of some Middle East terrorist organization. And maybe it's more in the realm of one of these Western-based, the media could probably do a pretty damn good job. Steven Spielberg or someone. So the man on the left was so distraught as he came to the aid of a dying Robert Kennedy that his left hand disappeared. And I did run this through photo forensics, and I also did look very carefully at the higher resolution image. This kind of dropped the resolution for the meme, but it still conveys what I found, which was that the guy appears not to have an arm underneath here. It's hard to say for sure, but I could really tell in the better quality image that there really wasn't anything there. So who knows what happened there? Max says, this is how they profiled all those ISIS terrorists, too. They would give them a profile like this with these different headshots. They would name them. They would have their stats and some kind of information, some kind of propaganda. So I figured I'd do one with Max Headroom that explains that terrorism's fake. So why pay any attention whatsoever? In America, since 2003, there have been 0 reported deaths from measles. 96 reported deaths from the measles vaccine. That's pretty weighty stuff. And I think I did a really good job of constructing this. And I also provide some footnotes so people can look up this information for themselves. Okay, so you remember down in New Zealand they had the shooting at the mosque.
Well, one thing I tried to depict in this 3-panel photo meme is the fact that there was an impossibility, really, here in the video, which it was a little unusual. So the guy comes in, here's his footprints I'm showing you just for reference, and you see there's a silver car right parked by the entrance. And then he comes back out and takes this right to reload, at which time he then goes back and re-enters, except this time he's re-entering from the other entrance up the way here. In photo 2, you see there's another entrance further up. When he comes back, he goes up here and he does some shooting this way, and you can see the vehicle still there as he comes this way. Well, when he makes that right turn and comes in, and then you see this angle, the car's now gone. It just disappears. I find that curious. Here I'm depicting a masked helper. It's the least he can do. Think Elon Musk founded Tesla? Well, here's Mark Tarpenning and Martin Eberhard, Tesla co-founders, posing with their first production model Roadster, meaning this vehicle was already done. It's coming off the line. And where's Elon Musk? Well, nowhere, because he didn't found Tesla. Neither did he found PayPal. I think he's retarded and gay, and I'll go into that. I might do a whole episode about Elon Musk. I think he's a scam. Anyway. And I'll end with this. Internet calls for Oprah, Tom Hanks, White House. So during the Trump run-up to the 2012 election, or 2016, what we found was some reports that, hey, the Internet's calling for Oprah and Tom Hanks to run for president and vice president. And here in this picture, I thought this was kind of an interesting photo to juxtapose against that story. We have Oprah here kind of sheepishly kind of giving you that sneaky smile. And then her, what is this, Gail, or whoever her assistant is. And this photo forensics checks out for this photo, by the way, but who knows. So here's Tom. He looks like he's a little more somber. He looks like he might be on the set of a film of some kind, maybe, but it's hard to say. And he's written, "I am not allowed to talk." And he appears to have a blackened left eye. And so I put the name, Tom the Craftsman with blackened left eye eating his pain. So, and by the way, yeah, you probably noticed that there's a clock-type thing on the wall that's been created, which looks like some kind of third-grade art project, in which there are raw hot dogs and hamburgers also glued to this clock thing, which, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Nothing to worry about here. And that's my meme review. And there it is. Boom, episode 2 is in the can. Now, I'm working on a number of possible guests. I've had to spend no less than 2 days this week working specifically on research of one particular person whom, if I'm correct in my assessment, might be hugely useful in our efforts to fix the media. He's not unknown, but he's also a tempest in a teapot. And I haven't seen anyone else try to take the lid off that teapot, in a sense, to use a phrase. And the 2011 bin Laden raid story was a solid 15 hours research time, which, by the way, I thought I was more familiar with it. I was, but it's been a long time, and there's a lot that I didn't know. And that's 15 straight hours I've been tracking. And, so that's basically 2 more days. So there's 4 full days alone I've spent distilling and then presenting this information to you. So, you probably want to subscribe to my channel. And you probably want to share this video. And you probably want to either make a one-time contribution by PayPal or contribute $5 a month and become a patron. Look, I know you're living in clown world full-time. And it's not that likely. It's not that it's going to change overnight. I understand that. But I know you're just a visitor to the park, We're not all part of the show. So God bless you. God bless you all for your perseverance. And I will see you next week.